Welcome, everyone, on this crisp, clear December day in Brussels. I'd like to welcome you all to the European Democracy Action Plan one-year Bilan high-level roundtable. I think the topic of the day is evident right there in the description of the event. As we all know, the European Democracy Action Plan was launched almost 1 year ago to the day. I think we're a year and a week since it came out. It's a tremendous plan, very important to us all personally and politically. And we thought it would be a good idea 1 year later to take stock both of what's been achieved, but also to talk about the future, what's yet to come, and how we can continue working as a community of concerned individuals, vice presidents of the Commission, think tankers, NGOs, all of us, to deliver on this. Because frankly, if I may, that's the essence of democracy. It's not a plan that comes from on high. It's something we all build together. We're delighted to have the Vice President for Values and Transparency of the European Commission with us today, who is also the author of this plan. Ms. Jourová is having a very busy day, so she's going to speak with us now, and I think she will be leaving in a few minutes to continue her very important work. I might take a very brief moment to introduce her, if I may. Ms. Jourová, for those of you who don't know, is a lawyer. She was briefly a Minister of Regional Development in the Czech government and is now on her second term at the European Commission, at least initially as Commissioner for Justice, Consumers, and Gender Equality, and more recently for Values and Transparency. Where Vice President, if I may, you've absolutely carried the flag for many of us, not just on the democracy dossier, but also rule of law, which has been a crucial part of the work of this commission. So thank you for that. I'll just mention when she's done, she's going to run, and then we will open the discussion to the floor. If those of you who want to ask a question can put it in the chat, we will call on you to ask your question, but your way of raising your hand is to post the question in the chat. When we do call on you, please turn on your camera so we can see you. And on that note, Vice President, thanks again for being with us. Thanks for your work all of the time, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to all. It's incredible. It's 1 year after we adopted the EDAP. It was a quick year. And thank you for saying the sentence that we all of us have to deliver on this. This is especially important for me because the EDAP is meant to be a very broad offer for everyone to do something to protect democracy. And as you said that I carry the flag, this is the quote of Ursula von der Leyen, who said that Jourová is always on the barricade, which was never my plan, but I can do it when necessary, of course. Well, but I will stop joking because this is a serious thing. We are going through big transition, green, digital. COVID pandemic is a very pressing issue, creating a special kind of atmosphere in the society, also contributing to the increase of aggression and radicalization of the society, and also contributing to increasing number of people who believe that democracy is not delivering what they need, which is mainly justice and security. This is what we hear from many people. So we realized it. This danger of less support for democracy already some time ago, and EDAP is full of the concrete actions which should be implemented by many different actors, so that we fulfill the promise that, or the need that democracy has to be protected actively, that it will not survive without active protection and nurturing. And when we published the Democracy Action Plan, I heard from some places, yes, the analysis is perfect, but too many words which do not lead to concrete results. And I always defended the plan that this is the plan for the next 3-4 years, when we will adopt the the key components of the plan, and we will bring them to life. So this is what we are doing. There is a lot about the role of technology in our democratic system. Rightly so, because I will always start by saying that technologies are, first of all, great opportunity for the society, for including democracy. And we see it especially now in the COVID time. It helps us to survive this horrible period. But of course, also we see widening existing divisions also by the influence of technologies, of social media. We see cases of abuse of personal data in trying to influence the voting preferences or push us further into our own bubbles. I sometimes speak about the privatization of public debate. Well, this is something we try to stop. The methods like micro-targeting are becoming more complex and more opaque. And we also see that disinformation can spread online like a wildfire. And this is why, for the first time ever, we decided to adopt a comprehensive plan. And this plan has to be also read and understood in conjunction with the legislation like Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act, and recently adopted regulation on political advertising. So this is the package. And I would even add GDPR, which was the first pioneering attempt to regulate in this area. And I hope all who read everything or who tried to understand might see the connecting line going through all these proposals, that at the center of everything we do is individual person, the citizen. And I don't mention consumer. I would really like to say again, citizen, who is the person, he or she, who is here who should enjoy full rights and who should remain a subject with autonomous possibility to make free choices. And this is what we have to protect also, these rights which the people have in Europe and which should also survive in online environment. So this is the connecting and I hope coherent approach we try to take. With the Digital Services Act, which is connected also, which is the twin with EDAP, we want to come for the first time with the hard regulation, which will increase responsibility and accountability of especially the large tech companies, because we see that the system is asymmetric and is a kind of broken when the huge power is not balanced with responsibility. Something crucial is not working, and we cannot continue like that. I had last week a thorough debate with the French key persons for the French presidency for who will take the lead of Europe next year, and there is a lot of appetite to engage very actively in the negotiations of the legislation like Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, and to gain the or to obtain the consent of all three co-legislators and have the trialogues finalized in the next half of the year. On political advertising, I think you understand why we didn't want to have this special kind of marketing under the DSA, which is more about the protection of consumers. I wanted this to be left for lex specialis. That's why we came with the proposal of political advertising, which in our view should have higher level of protection and more strict rules, and being more demanding as for transparency, so that the people, the potential voters, know that they read political content which aim is to influence their voting preferences and which is paid by somebody. and by whom it is paid, and for which purpose. It should not be just the hidden manipulation. Of course, every marketing is a kind of manipulation. Yeah, let's be honest with ourselves. But hidden manipulation could really have a huge impact on how our society is developing further. It could even make the elections to be less fair and less free, and to have free and fair elections. That's the pillar of the democracy. We have not invented anything better. So that's why we decided to come up with these stricter rules. Also, the political advertising proposal is based or built on GDPR. That's why we are banning micro-targeting based on sensitive data as it is defined in GDPR. And as I said, more transparency, more visibility, bigger chance for the people to realize this is the political content which wants me to do something, to go and buy a politician, which is not the same thing as if some commercial entity wants me to go and buy shoes, because I am buying the shoes for myself. Good idea to buy shoes, by the way, yes. But when I am buying politicians, I am buying them for everybody else. There is a much higher public interest to have this clean and transparent. So we are also working on other foreseen initiatives under EDAP. We will finalize the work on the strengthened or improved code of practice against disinformation. I had an interesting debate with Nikolay from Facebook this week, and last week with Kent Walker from Google. It's always interesting to exchange views, because the Commission and I myself, we want something, and we should hear from the platforms what's feasible, what else can we do. Our constant request, please be more active in all EU member states' languages. Do not neglect any of the member states. In COVID time, please do more against the conspiracy theories and the anti-vaccine stupid and dangerous kinds of disinformation. And please give us more data so that the researchers can give us more insight how what we do against disinformation impacts the society, because we don't know anything about that, and we need data for maybe future better political decision making. And I am aware disinformation is not illegal content, but it's harmful content, and we have to do a lot against that. But the primary interest for us also has to be to protect the freedom of speech. We are dependent, or we are relying on the fact checking. I have to say again that what the Commission understands by fact checking is checking the facts, not correcting somebody else's opinions. Because for me, this is censorship. Yeah. So again, I have to explain once again my perspective of looking at fight against disinformation. Also in EDAP, we have strong chapter on why and how to protect media better. So in the next year, we will come with the legislation and non-legislative actions against so-called strategic lawsuits against public participation, those so-called SLAPs. And we will, I hope in July, adopt the so-called Media Freedom Act, which should give us better chance to react in case of some harsh actions in the member states against media pluralism and freedom. Because at this moment, we do not have any instrument to react, or very, very little. We are opening the public consultations in the next few weeks. So we expect also a lot of expert opinions, and we are in contact with the public authorities, with the regulators. We want to do this right. Also, this Media Freedom Act will have to be consistent with the Digital Services Act and with everything we do on digital. Because when I look at the whole picture, at the end of the day, we will have in the member states the authorities which will become the enforcers of these regulations. And I don't want to pave the way to hell by enabling a creation of the enforcement authorities which will be omnipotent arbiters of the truth, for instance. And again, this is my instinct of somebody who lived in censorship half of my life. And I don't remember it, I'm not that old, but in the 50s in my country, there was the Minister of Information, Mr. Kopecky, who was more influential than the communist president. Nothing like that has to happen in Europe. Yeah, so I always get upset when I speak about these things. Sorry, but Renate will be in the panel. My beloved head of cabinet, so she will go into more details. We are happy to renew for the renewed dialogue with the United States. And we are ready to contribute to the US initiative of President Biden on Democracy Summit taking place this week already. When the Biden's administration came, there was a big relief in Europe that we have our hopefully trustworthy, reliable partner back. But at the same time, we had to emphasize we are not entering again the same river. Yeah, we are advanced in Europe. But anyway, this is a great moment. We are facing very similar issues and problems with the United States, also which stem from big power of digital, big tech, and also the power of the social media as such, and the users-driven content, which is sometimes a headache because it's full of hatred and all those horrible things. So we really have to try to tackle the problems in good cooperation with the United States, not to reinvent the wheel. But I would like to say that in Europe, we are now inventing the wheel as the first ones. Because we are advanced in the regulation. And I think also with this philosophy of human-centered technology, this is something which is also close to how United States see the values and fundamental rights. So I don't think we have any conceptual or ideological issue, and we can really work together as like-minded partners. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. I'm sure you will have a good debate, and Renate will inform me afterwards whether there were some new enlightening, revolutionary ideas, which with full humbleness I am able to show. I still can accept they might come in the debate, something we have not realized yet. We need the feedback at every minute of our work. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you, Vice President. I apologize. I was muted and everyone was, otherwise you would be hearing the thunderous prolonged applause. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think Renate Nikolay is here somewhere. Renate, maybe I dive in with a very, very quick question. Are you here, Renate?
I am.
Good. Hello, welcome, please. For those of you who don't know Renate Nikolay, she is the head of cabinet for Vice President Jourová. One very quick question. We all saw this in the news recently, that the Code of Conduct on Disinformation has been postponed until March next year. But for a very good reason, because there are all of a sudden quite a few, not just companies, but companies and news agencies and different types of organizations that are crowding in and taking part in the drafting of it, which needless to say is very important. It's it's meant to be a plan for everybody and not just a plan for on high. But maybe you could say a few words of that. Why was it postponed, and what are your hopes for the outcome of that particular proposal?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there was indeed a very good reason for postponement, because we are doing this kind of new code of practice on disinformation, or the new pact on disinformation, however we want to call it at the end, because it's the result of our assessment of the old code of practice. And if the new code is supposed to really work in the context of the Digital Services Act as a risk mitigating measure, which is the whole kind of construct of it, then we really need to get better. We need to get better in terms of broadening the signatories. We also need to get better in kind of deepening the level of obligations. And we need to get better in kind of having better access for a broader audience, especially the civil society, but also the researchers to it. So we are in very good, I think, discussions with the kind of the key participants. We got very recently very good messages from the platforms, but also from the other actors, as you rightly said, that there's a real engagement. Sometimes it's better to take a bit longer to then get it right. We want to be well tuned in terms of the timing with the advancement of our digital rule book that the Vice President referred to with the DSA and the DMA. And as you know, we got a very good success in the Competitiveness Council with the general approach. We hope that the Parliament will follow suit in January. So if we come in March with our revamped code of practice, I think we will be just in time to kind of influence the trilogue and to help kind of, paving the way for the final adoption.
Terrific. Thank you so much for that. I would love to come back with a question right away, but we're actually running late already, which I apologize for, except if you have to run late because the Vice President's speech was great, that's as good a reason to run late as I can think of. Listen, I'd like to turn now, we'll come back to you later in the discussion, is what I'm saying. I'd like to turn to Rahaf Harfoush. Those of you who don't know Rahaf, even though you're very young, you probably don't know this, but you've been a dominant influence in my life. She worked on the digital campaign of then Senator Barack Obama some years ago, one of the very early pioneering efforts to use social media for what, I'm about to make a political statement here, for what I think was undoubted political good. You guys did an amazing job in that election, and filled a lot of people with hope. She's a veteran of that campaign. She's gone on to write quite a few books and to teach in France, and she's going to tell us a little bit now about her work, her views on digital and democracy. And maybe, Rahaf, you could look forward a bit to something that's been mentioned once or twice here, which is the coming French presidential campaign. What are the stakes on the line there, and what do we all need to be looking out for? And how, in particular, can we make sure not just to stop all the bad things happening, we know about that, but how to use democracy as a tool, how to use digital technology as a tool to enhance democracy?
Well, thank you so much, and what a lovely thing to say. I think that kind of made my day, so thank you. I am a digital anthropologist, and the bulk of my research focuses on the intersection of technology and culture. So I really look at not just at the technologies that are being used, but what those technologies represent in terms of values, priorities, belief systems. And one of the things that we've been doing, so I'm both on France's National Digital Council, the Conseil National Numérique, and as well as a member of President Macron's new commission looking at technology and democracy. And so I have spent the large portion of my time in the last couple of months really deep diving into this issue. And one of the things I think that many people have a hard time grasping is the notion that this is such a multi-level issue where you have very different agendas and very different priorities that are colliding in one digital ecosystem. So for example, we know that misinformation and disinformation is a geopolitical issue. We know that there are countries that are using it deliberately to manipulate, to create chaos. And so, we're not going to tell them to stop. So I tend to not to focus so much on that one because there's other sort of cybersecurity initiatives that deal with that. We also know that this is an economic issue. So for CNUM, we wrote a report that came out a couple of weeks ago, taking QAnon, for example, and detailing at least 5 different business models where people are making money off of the spread of these types of conspiracy theories. And so these are people's businesses, these are people's ad revenues, these are people's application, there's merchandise, there's mugs, there's t-shirts, but at the heart of it, it is a business. And the same can be said for a lot of the COVID misinformation. There was that recent report that came out a couple of months ago that said that something like 66% of COVID disinformation and misinformation was being spread by 12 people. I think they called them the dirty dozen, the COVID dirty dozen. That's 12 people that were impacting the ecosystem with 66% of the spread. And when you we took a look at some of those people, and you could always trace it back to a business. The same person that was telling you that COVID is just like the flu has a multi-million-dollar supplement business. So we also need to understand that there is money at play and that people are deliberately doing this to earn money, which I think gives us and gives regulators and politicians the opportunity to approach it from an economic perspective as well. And finally, historically, misinformation is a social issue. It generally represents social degradation or the lack of trust in institutions. While the scale of what we're seeing is quite big, it's not new. I recently was reading a book that was published in 1929 about written by a historian who was documenting the rise of conspiracy theories and apocalyptic theories during the Industrial Revolution, and how when people are facing economic uncertainty, when they're facing fear, when they're facing new technologies, when they're facing complete disruptions, factor in a global pandemic, it is not unheard of or strange for them to try to make meaning. And I think often we look at people, or I've heard people looking at these types of communities and saying, oh, they're dumb, or they're crazy, or we just need infographics. And we're missing the human connection. These are people that are building communities, they're building relationships, they're trying to make sense of their lives, and they're trying to deal with a crippling amount of uncertainty. And I don't think it does anybody any good to be able to sort of come in and condescend to them, or worse, try to legislate without actually understanding the intricacies of these communities. I always say it's like trying to zone a neighborhood that you've never visited before and thinking that that's going to have an impact. Finally, just from a societal level, very quickly, I think that part of our problem is that we are noticing the impact of technology that is both good and bad simultaneously at scale, which makes it very hard for us to say, is this good or is this bad? Because the answer is both at the same time, often from the same companies. So the same companies that are creating a lot of good are also creating a lot of harm, and that makes finding solutions to be far more complex than what we're used to. But I would challenge that if we're going to look to the future, we have to look at the underlying beliefs of what we as a society believe and what we as a society want. So everything that is happening around us right now is a reflection of market priorities or of our societal priorities, whether we like them or not. And I'll give you a very quick example, which is right now, every time we hear people talking about innovation and the startup landscape, they're obsessed with unicorns. How many unicorns does your ecosystem have? How many startup unicorns exist? So unicorns are just companies valued at $1 billion, but our obsession with them, that says that that's the most important thing, that revenue is the most important thing. So when you're bragging about unicorns, you're saying valuation over everything else. Versus what if we ranked our startup ecosystems based on the good that they were doing, based on sustainable technology, based on equality, based on transparency, based on sustainability? Would our ecosystems look a little bit different? And I do think that this is why the regulation conversation is so important, because we're not regulating as a way to stop innovation. I believe we need to regulate in a way that aligns innovation with a system of prosperity that is inclusive. So historically, companies, unfortunately, haven't had the best track record of regulating themselves. We've had to tell companies not to pollute the oceans, not to put cancer-causing chemicals in products, not to make children work in factories. And so why are we suddenly surprised that this new industry is also going to require some guidance? But in order to have the proper guidance, we have to stop treating the symptoms, which is the disinformation and the misinformation, and we really have to focus on the root causes, which is social degradation, a lack of proper regulation, and a lack of proper oversight in terms of the transparency and sharing of data.
Wow. Well, that was absolutely fascinating, Rahaf. And I almost wish we could stop right there and follow up on some of those points you raised, but we'll have to wait until we get back to the discussion. But I think you're absolutely right. There is a lot of money in play here, and we need to understand that if we're going to understand what we do about the problem of misinformation. So thank you for stressing that. I'm going to turn now briefly to Claire Mellier. Claire, I don't know if you actually were in Glasgow or not, but you might as well have been, because the work that you and your organization did on COP26 recently was groundbreaking and tremendously important and inspiring. And I'd like to give you the floor, along with the question, which is, where do you see the nexus of technology and democracy? And how can all of us, both the organization you lead and the people on this call, how can we join together to make it, I take Rahaf's point, there's a little bit of good and bad in everything, but how can we make it a net good for the world?
Well, thank you very much for this introduction. So I will start by just using what Vice President Vera has just talked about when she said we need more protection of democracy. And I think by protection, I think we need actually transformation and deep transformation. And that's, I suppose, that's what we are trying to do with the Global Citizens Assembly, which is part of this global, national and local wave of citizens' deliberation processes. And so I was in Glasgow at COP26, and we, as part of the Global Assembly, the Assembly members presented their People's Declaration in Glasgow, and there was a warm welcome from across the board to understand what new forms of citizens' participation could look like. And I think we're in the midst of this transition where we see that there's research showing, like the Pew research published earlier this year, showing that there's massive distrust in the current political system, and that citizens' input is absolutely essential at all levels. And there was one question from one of your attendees saying, how do we organize multi-level democracy in Europe from the global to from the local level? Well, with the Global Assembly, that's what we're trying to do. So we are bringing a core assembly of 100 citizens from across the globe, and that's never been done before. So we had to, this year is very much a year of prototyping and learning, and we identify 100 citizens, including citizens from China, from India, from countries in democratic transitions, and we brought them together to explore the question of how can humanity address the climate ecological crisis in a fair and effective way? So not a small question to address. And what we're learning from these processes, and the Global Assembly is really building on the learning from this wave of citizens' deliberative processes, including the French Convention Citoyenne, which I was an observer of, and we've learned lots from this process in terms of how does change happen? And we've seen with the French Convention, for instance, that what came out of it was quite transformative. And then the translation process into the climate and resilience bills was showing the struggles we're facing right now in terms of the power. Where does the power lie, and where are we heading? And I think with the Global Assembly, what we're trying to do is model new forms of global governance where citizens are part of the global governance system. And in Glasgow, it was really fascinating to see the citizens from the Global Assembly reflecting on the negotiation in Glasgow, and how these issues of fairness and equity were really at the heart of the People's Declaration, and how they felt the negotiations were not reflecting that. And it was a learning process for them not only in terms of the content of the climate ecological crisis, but in terms also of the kind of global governance processes. And I'm conscious of time, but in terms of your question of how to harness the power of digital tools, well, interestingly, with the Global Assembly, it's a process that's taking place online, because we felt that we couldn't bring people together from across the world, not only in terms of carbon impact, but also the practicalities of that in COVID times. But that's one of the, I would say, silver lining for the deliberative world, actually, from COVID, is that we've seen these processes moving online. So climate citizens assemblies across Europe, like in Scotland, for instance, where the assembly was designed online from start to finish. So we see that we can use the power of digital engagement. And in this case, it's using Zooms to connect people together. But that's what we're doing with the Global Assembly as well, is harnessing the power of digital tools to allow people to connect. So I think we are, as I said, in the midst of probably a transition, and the future in terms of global governance and democratic processes will look very different. And I hope that citizens are much more at the heart of all these processes, whether it's at the local level all the way to the global.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time, and you have gone a little bit over, Claire, but I'm going to ask you a quick question and ask if maybe your answer could be short too. We were talking a minute ago about disinformation. I'm curious how you deal with that in this context. What do you do about people who bring in wrong facts and hate speech in a context as open as the one that you've just described?
So in terms of how is the learning phase, for instance, of the Global Assembly? How do you identify what's evidence and that's
what's not, right?
And what's not. So this is why we've got governance mechanisms where you've got a knowledge and wisdom committee, which includes scientists, experts, but also indigenous knowledge wisdom keepers who have shaped the learning phase for the Global Assembly. And then obviously citizens will bring their own facts and beliefs, and that's the power of deliberation. Then you hear from each other, and citizens go through this transformation. And so that's what the power is you can't shut it down. You just have to support people to meaningfully engage and make sure they can see from different perspectives. That's the power.
Perfect, thank you so much. I'd like to turn now, if I may, to Marisa Jiménez. Marisa, from the company formerly known as Facebook, now of course known as Meta. I don't think it requires any introduction because we all know it and use it and read about it. I don't know who does Facebook's PR, but not a day goes by when you're not in the news. Marisa, would you like to join the floor and tell us a little bit about what Meta is doing these days to promote democracy, to guarantee democracy, and to ensure that digital platforms are a forum for better discussion and debate, and not for the opposite?
Thank
Marisa,
you.
I don't see
and
you.
no,
Are you here?
Why? Yes, I am. I'm here.
You need to switch your camera on.
My camera is on.
Okay.
My camera is on. Can't you see me? Let me see. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to turn it on again. I see the four of you, but
There you are. Hey, you're in now. Now you're good.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Thank you. So I'm delighted to be here, and it is a very difficult question to be answered in 2 or 3 minutes. What are we doing and where? But I do think that, of course, for us is paramount. It's paramount that the platform and the services that we provide are a safe space in which that empowers voice. Sometimes people talk about safety. In fact, I was in a panel yesterday where safety and freedom of expression were put as two competing rights. And that's not right? It has to be, in order to have a place for free expression, the platform needs to be safe from hate speech, needs to be safe from disinformation, from bullying, from harassment, from gender-based violence, for so many things. So the first thing that we're doing is to tackle the harm on the platform and promote the good. We say, minimize the bad, maximize the good, which can be applied to everything. I think that I would like to, mention a couple of things in reaction to what we have just heard. I think that it is fundamental, what we heard from the previous speaker, to underscore the importance of the use of platforms as engagement, promoting engagement, and tools for civic participation and civic engagement. On the other hand, I thought that it was really interesting, the discussions that we just had about coming together and prioritizing, because these issues are so complex and so big that not one platform, not one industry, can solve it together. So the first thing is coming together with having everyone has a responsibility in this work, but also we need prioritization of the work. And I think that one of the frameworks that has helped us very much so to do that prioritization work that then influences our product work as well is the European Democracy Action Plan. Because the European Democracy Action Plan a year ago did exactly that. It's put priorities. So the vice president was speaking about putting the citizen at the center. I was going to say the user at the center, because that's how we speak in platforms, but it is exactly that. And when it comes to priorities, where should we be focusing our efforts? And then we saw areas like fighting disinformation, or being more transparency in political advertising, really giving digital literacy the role that it deserves, not only in the companies, but also in policy making. And these were very important points that the European Democracy Action Plan included. And 1 year in there, we already see some of the, what have we've all done with this European Democracy Action Plan. Well, indeed, there's the political advertising rules that have just been proposed, and they will have to go through the decision-making process, which really give answers to questions that we had posed in the past. For example, if we look at, a political advertising in the area, in the European Parliament elections, for example, there was a big question about, could we do cross-border, or could political parties do cross-border advertising? And now we have the answers in the proposal, because not only it defines what a European political party is, it was really difficult for us to determine that. It determines what the relationship is between the national legislation and the European legislation. And it puts at the heart and center the important thing here, which is cross-border is important because we live in an internal market. So just to give you, I know that it seems a very technical example, but it just shows how you can go from principles and values and very general policies to really very concrete answers to questions. And I think that that is something that we all have to congratulate ourselves and congratulate the Commission for coming up. There's other things that probably will need some refining, but this is an example of where can we go from theory to practice. The second point really quickly that I wanted to mention is the COVID-19 crisis, which we still are. The COVID-19, in a way, was an experiment of policy making, in that it was for the first time in a long time, where there was a call for action to the industry and others by VP Jourová, by the European Commission, in particular by VP Jourová. I can still remember February 2020, so a little before the EDAP, but how that really, that spirit of collaboration, coordination, and prioritization has then spread out through the work. Let's talk about, for instance, another example, the Code of Misinformation we've just referred to. It is remarkable that this tool is no longer a response that platforms need to give to a problem. The code of practice now engages civil society, engages fact checkers. We work hand in hand with them, engages social civil society. That is really innovative. I always say it's innovative, and because it's new. And I think that is the right approach. There's still a lot to do. Of course there is. And we are constantly, especially with misinformation, trying to see what are the elements that will make us fight this harm better. And if in 2020, promoting authoritative sources of information in January 2020, that really wasn't something key for us. Today, it absolutely is. And we see that the Commission also agrees with that. Our partners agree with that. So things change and things evolve. But just to note, prioritization, working together, and a solid policy framework is something that really helps companies move forward.
Thank you, Marisa. I have to keep muting because otherwise the noise at my desk here interferes with the meeting. If you don't mind, I'm just going to ask you two questions, which are really sort of the same question thrown into one. Something that Vice President Jourová said in her remarks, which, by the way, I thought were fascinating, and I hope you all join me later in thanking her for sharing so much on a busy day like this. She said, checked facts and not opinions. That's a pretty easy statement to agree with, but a very difficult distinction to make in the real world, where Meta General Assembly, where the rest of us have to work. I'm just wondering, how does one make that distinction? And maybe my second question, which is related, I mean, we've all heard and seen Mark Zuckerberg say 100 times that he doesn't want to be the head of a private company making decisions of this type, that at the end of the day, he welcomes regulation, in particular in this area, and I just heard you do the same. I'm just wondering how all of that works, because I quite often see Meta's point of view on this mischaracterized. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yes, very interesting question and very difficult one. I think we have to distinguish between a company not wanting to make decisions and a company not doing anything to avoid harm on the platform. These are two very different things. So we do have the rules of the game. The rules of the game are there. There shouldn't be any harassment. There shouldn't be any bullying. There shouldn't be that. Now we can talk about whether the enforcement is right, whether we have to make it, but the rules are there. So we will act on those rules. There's no question about it. It's zero tolerance to many things. Another question is when we're talking about certain types of content, which really are very, we go into difficult territory because they get really close to opinions, right? The facts and opinions, that barrier, it's blurred, and context also sometimes is important. So the distinction that we do make here is that if the legal but harmful content, if it's expressed on the platform, could lead in certain circumstances to a real or an imminent danger of real harm, of physical harm, we would have to make that decision immediately and remove the content. So this is really important. Public harm, real harm is a fundamental thing. When it comes to things that are closer to opinion that do not create a real harm in the real world, then that is more difficult. And that's why we have traditionally relied on fact checking, so third-party fact checking on that type of content. But I have to say that fact checking is not always it cannot be always the panacea, or it cannot act on its own. It won't solve all the problems on its own. And one of the areas where we're seeing some challenges is, for instance, in the area of climate misinformation. This is something that my colleagues dealing with it are saying. So basically it cannot be only this issue cannot only be done through fact checking. Critical thinking is as important or more than any other tool that we might use against misinformation, other than removal of the real harm led misinformation. Okay,
thank you. Oh, good. My mic is still on. Thank you. We're running a little bit late, so if you don't mind, I'm going to go to our two last speakers before we open the discussion. We will open it at 5 and run at least 10 minutes late, but I promised all our speakers we would get them out of here by 5, so we'll let them have the floor now. Jonas Sirovatka joins us from Czech Republic. He is the author of a recent study on the Czech elections, which I think everyone on this call followed rather closely, a rather interesting outcome, an interesting fight that led up to it. And Jonas, the floor is yours. If I could just ask you to tell us a bit about that study, but also, of course, the other event everyone has in their minds, the upcoming French presidential elections. What are the implications of that, for that? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the floor. Good afternoon, everyone. And while talking about this, let's say about the case of Czech elections, I will try to kind of underline more general point because I'm very glad that we are discussing this in the context of various legislative initiatives that are taken at the European level. But at the same time, I would argue that already quite a lot of very good work is being done, and there is quite a lot of initiatives on which this legislative work can develop on. And I will I hope that I kind of try to I'll be able to illustrate that basically already at this point it's possible to be quite effective even without kind of these legal instruments. So what we try to do, we in our institute are interested in like security issues, and me personally, I am responsible for the project related to disinformation and information warfare. And being by education the political scientist, I'm very much interested about the intersection between disinformation and Czech politics. And therefore, like the election is like very obvious topic for me and my research. So we basically I'm using this let's say this formulation, since these were not the first elections we were observing, but our aim was to look into, let's say, something I would call, let's say, alternative media landscape, which is some term that even the writers and authors on these pages would use for themselves, and to map their attitudes towards Czech politics and their ambition to, let's say, to interfere in the elections. And of course, important byproduct of that is ability to track disinformation and manipulative narratives that they are kind of applying to pursue their political goals. Unfortunately, there is no time to go deeper into the situation, but I will make just two general observations about this, about the findings of our research. Like, firstly, a very important thing is that despite we are focusing on the website, the Facebook and social platforms in general still playing very important role in spreading these messages via closed groups, via Facebook pages, and so on. Basically, yes, every one of these websites has its own Facebook profile, which it uses for spreading, for multiplying its reach. And secondly, the problematic thing is that what we encounter was quite a lot of manipulation, but very little of manipulation by, let's say, factually incorrect messages, because even those actors are knowing how to walk the line and how to avoid of being regulated or being punished, which again is, let's say, quite a challenge for tackling this issue. And at the same time, I would refer to what was already said, that we probably need to look into the area of disinformation from various perspectives to learn, what kind of reason is, for example, for believing in some of these statements. Nevertheless, we were not interested only in research, but we also see our mission as somebody who, with ability to conduct real-time monitoring, can contribute to the better climate and the election integrity. And therefore, we are trying to be actively engaged with journalists, with state institutions, with policymakers. And this time, we also were in active cooperation and communication with then Facebook, now Meta, on basically on exchange of information and on rising of awareness about what is the situation in Czech information space. And we were able to gather also the community of researchers from Czech Republic who was exchanging the information, and with the cooperation with people from Warsaw office of Facebook, then we were also able to communicate about, let's say, our approach to the problem, and to see what is their perspective and what are their possibilities. Needless to say, there was not that much manipulation related to the Czech elections, but I think one thing by which we were contributing was the ability to kind of track the harmful narratives related to COVID and to vaccination, which, again, despite that it's a bit different issue, I hope that we were able to do at least some good in this area. So thank you very much for the attention, and I will be happy to elaborate more on some topics in the Q&A.
Thank you, Jonas. That was very interesting what you said about how clever the manipulators of democracy have gotten in using facts to simultaneously sell stories that might very well be false. I'm just wondering what, not just you, but what all the people involved in the Czech election did to nonetheless make it an outcome that I think is seen universally as free and fair and quite positive for the country.
Well, I think that a very important thing was that in Czech Republic there is quite a lot of attention dedicated to the issue of disinformation. That basically the media, politicians, state institutions are aware that this is an issue, and already the very fact that we had like significant debate about the fact that disinformation might cause harm helped in preventing like the worst, let's say the worst case scenario. I'm not saying that there were no disinformation. I'm not saying that some parties didn't have problems with disinformation, and I might like elaborate a bit more on the results and show that there was like a lot of that it was a bit more complex. But what I would say as a kind of starting point, like the awareness and public discussion kind of helps very much in this regard.
Well, awareness and public discussion, I can't think of anything more democratic than that. So maybe what I hear you saying is that the answer to democracy's problems is more democracy. I think on that note, I'm going to turn to Anton'Maria Battesti, who also joins us from Meta. Anton is down in the trenches, sleeves rolled up to his eyeballs, ready to deliver us a free and fair French election, which will be not only free and fair, but more democratic than any election the world has ever seen. And on those very limited expectations, let me hand the floor over to you and tell us about the important work you're doing going forward to protect election integrity in France.
Thank you very much, and bonjour, everyone. I'll try to stay quite short. A lot of work to do for next year election, obviously. First, I want to say we invest a lot in civic engagement. We want to tell people there is an election. They have to register if they want to participate. So we will put this type of reminders. We'll also remind people when the vote will be on. So this type of tool we have already used in our past elections 5 years ago. I was there, but in other countries too. And that will be used again, of course, in the future. So very important to mobilize people. 2, safety, obviously, like we want political parties, candidates to have their online presence on Facebook, Instagram to be safe, to be secure. So we will be engaging with their teams to make sure that they're not victims of any type of hacking or attempt to disrupt their activities. We will, of course, enforce our community standards. I want to be very clear. The rules applies to everyone. So, of course, there is freedom of expression, but if you do not respect the community standards of Facebook, then we will take some actions. Another important note on fake news. 5 years ago in France, we started the fact-checking program, and now we have it in many other countries in the world. As it has been mentioned here several times, we don't want to be the arbiter of truth. So we are working with a series of partners. You may know AFP, Newswire, or Le Monde, and others. They work with us to fact-check content. It's a robust system. So once the content is fact-checked, is really the visibility is very limited. People receive a form of awareness, a signal, and we've seen very promising results in the COVID crisis, and we hope that it's going to continue to have an impact on the elections. But I want to say we're not working alone. That will be my last point. We work closely with all French authorities, law enforcement, the media regulator, the CSA, the new agency created for foreign interference called Viginum, the group created by President Macron on this type of challenges, led by Gerald Bronner, the sociologist. So we're there, and I want to say we're ready for whatever happens.
Thank you. I apologize. I was muted there. I said very nice things about Rahaf, and the Obama campaign, and very sincere. But I might also have mentioned that the Macron election, the election in which Emmanuel Macron was elected president 5 years ago, was very much a watershed in the fight against disinformation, which those of us who follow these issues closely, there was an effort to interfere in a meaningful way in that election, which you were able to successfully block. So I guess maybe just briefly before we open the floor to discussions, Anton, what is there anything special planned for this time around, and how beyond Meta, beyond platforms, beyond all of that, how can we as citizens help to keep this election essentially our own? That it's for our voters to decide, and not for others to trip us up and tell us silly things.
And again, is really to be there. Like we have 40,000 people working to enforce the rules on Facebook. We have a team on the ground engaging with all these stakeholders. So it's important to be proactive. And I should have mentioned more, maybe education. So we have a lot of educational programs for the wider public. So to for example, with the AFP, we've run a campaign online to raise awareness on what is a fake news. How can you identify it? How can you report it? So it's really not, there is no silver bullet when it comes to protect democracy online. We use all the available tools, and we have an experience now. We of course are going to mobilize for this very important elections for France, obviously, but also for Europe next year.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, Jeremy Millard, who was trying to ask a question, has had to leave. But I wanted, first of all, to invite any of the rest of you who have any questions, including our speakers, by the way. In a democracy, we don't expect you to have all the answers. Ask us something. You're all welcome to put a question in the chat, and we'll get to as many of you as we can. We're running overtime, and I'm going to let this go up to 5:15, by the way, and then we will cut this off just so we have a few minutes to discuss. And in the meantime, I'd like to call on Ruth Marie Hinkes from the European Partnership for Democracy, whom I believe has just written a study of the European Democracy Action Plan. Ruth Marie, I'm sorry there wasn't time to have you as a speaker today. As you can see, we're over time already. And if you could keep your remarks short and to the point, we'd love to hear a word or two about what's in your study and how we can find it. Ruth Marie?
Paul, I don't think she's with us anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, I apologize. We went over time with her as well. Are there any other questions from the group? Come on, this is democracy. All right. Well, in that case, let me go back to Rahaf, who kicked us off a minute ago. Rahaf, you not only raised very many interesting points in your presentation, but quite a few have been raised subsequently. I'm wondering if you'd like to come back on some of this, comment on anything that you've heard, and tell us what, in particular, you'll take away from this this meeting. I won't give my own summary. I'll let you do that. But what are you going to take from this meeting, and what would you like to leave with us for further discussion and reflection?
I mean, on the optimistic side, it's always nice to hear the initiatives that companies like Meta are addressing to try to tackle some of these changes. I know sometimes as a consumer, as a user, it feels a little bit hopeless sometimes, and to kind of know that there are a lot of smart people that are trying to fix this together just makes me kind of feel a little bit better. The one thing I would say, though, is especially within the lens of democracy, while there are certain approaches which are like, you know, that were mentioned, the fact checking, the interagency cooperation, the oversight groups, all of those things, that there is also the hidden aspects of just our general use, our general norms around using some of these tools. And those are some of the things that maybe we might not link to an election, but that still heavily influence what we see and where we spend our time. So things like suggested algorithms, suggested groups, suggested paths, and things that can kind of direct a little bit in terms of what people experience online. And I think that is also a part of the conversation. I know that every platform's in the battle for people's attention and people's time, and we just need to think about how are we directing them as they engage in this space, whether it's whether it's a Google search result or an Instagram group or a Facebook group or a Discord server. How are we designing experiences that are prioritizing different levels of information? In particular, I would love to hear the panel's thoughts around influencers, particularly. This is something I've been thinking a lot about, that we're not necessarily worried about individuals that are spreading disinformation, but generally they're nodes in the network of micro influencers, see people that have 10,000 followers and more, and their capacity to diffuse information, their capacity to spread information is just so much more than a regular citizen. And I know that that's been something I've been thinking about as we've been tracking. I've been personally tracking French election misinformation and disinformation campaigns online across several platforms, including Discord and Telegram and some of the other platforms that are out there as well. And so I just think it's about a bigger conversation. The elections is a microcosm of some of the bigger things happening in the ecosystem. So I know that what I'm taking away from it is that we continue to need to have this collaboration between civil society and the platforms as well as legislation, but ultimately the deeper conversation is one that is going to be about what kind of society do we want to live in and what type of role do we want these platforms to have.
Terrific, thank you so much. I'd like to invite my 9-year-old son to speak at this because he loves these influencers. Our family is full of Darman and Charlie D'Amelio and these people. You don't know who they are, but they're essentially becoming his principal educators in life. Ms. Nikolay is going to need to run with this. Renate, we're so delighted you could be with us because I can't imagine what the agenda is like over there in your office today. I can barely keep up reading about you, so I can't imagine what it's like on the other side here. Can I give you the same question as well? Would you like to come back on any of this? What have you learned and what questions would you like to lead with us? And if you don't mind, I'll cram in one last question. How can we help?
I think by hosting events like this one, that's already a very big help, because I think we are all together on a road on this. I've been kind of following the whole kind of digital rulemaking and also how we address disinformation from a kind of European institution point of view from the beginning. And I think in the beginning it was much more of a niche issue, whereas now it's really on central stage. There's hardly, and I think the pandemic, the vaccine disinformation, climate disinformation, disinformation, manipulation, and election campaigns have all contributed to that. We hardly have a European Council with the heads of states that hasn't, in the Council conclusion somewhere, the need to kind of work for a more effective fight against disinformation. So we are less naive about this. We are much more equipped. We know very well that we cannot regulate it away, that we need a kind of a multi-stakeholder approach where, researchers, kind of the business, the fact checkers, the regulators, are all involved in that. So I want to thank you for that. And I want us to kind of, keep in touch and keep this conversation and dialogue alive, because disinformation will always find new ways. Disinformation has always been in society. I mean, we are dealing with it and with more attention, because in the digital environment, the amplification, the speed, that's what we have to kind of, deal with, so that the harm is kind of, easier to kind of address. But I think we will have to keep on our toes and just be on alert and always be ready to kind of, respond effectively when we see, with the whole architecture in place, when we see new elements of disinformation. So thank you for that. I'm sorry to have kind of, quit you now, but I have to run to my next meetings. Thanks so much.
But listen, before you run, could I just say one thing briefly? I apologize for abusing the floor like this. If there were more time, I would love to talk to you in greater detail about the code of conduct on misinformation. Because I think your activities in that area have been fascinating and, by the way, very promising. There was a real move to declare that, quote, self-regulation wasn't working, but this project is much more complicated than self-regulation. It's about building a community, many of which are on this call here today. Did we lose Renate anyway? I was saving this for my concluding remarks, but I think it's true, and I'm delighted to see everyone crowding into that project. And I think it has enormous potential in the future, especially the more people who are involved, the better, because at the end of the day, it's all about community. It's not about dictating anything to anyone or deciding what's right or wrong on behalf of other people. It's about how we come together to protect our society.
Andy,
Thank you.
I fully agree.
Thank you so
Couldn't agree
much.
more.
I
Bye.
appreciate it. Thanks for
Bye-bye.
staying late. Claire, you had a question in the chat I saw a moment ago, which hopefully you've already seen, because unfortunately it's gotten buried a little bit in my notes here. Where is the question for Claire?
I think,
Claire, can you help me?
was it regarding the most surprising or unexpected?
Yes, that's it. Yes, exactly. And let me throw in my question too. What have you learned from this discussion, and what will you take?
So from the Global Assembly's perspective, what's becoming always obvious with these processes is that people keep saying, how come we didn't know about this, where we didn't have the information to really understand the climate ecological crisis, and now we do. So these processes are supporting people's understanding of the crisis. And so the question it's raising for me is, what's the role of the media in this? And obviously there's the risk that climate deniers are manipulating the information, but I think actually the risk we're facing is more around the general apathy and the fact that the media are not talking about the issue of the climate ecological crisis in the way that we need to talk about it. So I'm less worried in a way with regards to climate, less worried about the climate deniers, but the shift from moving away from there's less denial about climate. I think now it's more about the scale of the change. People are aware of the urgency and the emergency, but it's about the scale of the change that is required. I think there's more what Kevin Anderson, a professor in climate science, is talking about, the climate mitigation denial rather than the climate denial. But one taking away from this conversation is, at the heart of this, that's human connections. And that's what I suppose that's what these processes are all about, is bringing people together who have different views and trying to address polarization. And for me, my experience as a facilitator of these processes is that they are outstanding at addressing polarization and bringing people together.
Okay, thank you so much, Claire, and thank you for your advocacy in that area, which is very important. I'll have a couple of words to say about that at the end. Marisa, would you like to come back on these final questions about what you've heard, what you might like to come back on?
So I think that one area that I really would like to come with is the fact that fighting for democracy or space for democracy is not only about free and fair elections. And in other words, free and fair elections is not always about the election period. And I think we know that. We know that well at Meta, Facebook still, but at Meta. And I think that it's an important thing, that we just not look at these things when elections are due or important elections are around the corner. That's one thing. The second point would be that the nature of the problems really evolve, and so should the tools and how to address them. And I think that there on climate change, it's an important example, right? So the differences between a vaccine crisis and a climate change area, very important, both of them, but with their nuances. And the third element is that I see that there's a lot of convergence from people that come from very different perspectives. And that is encouraging, and we need to continue working on that collaboration and prioritization. Thank you so much for organizing this.
Well, you're welcome. We have a tradition here at the Lisbon Council where our favorite thing to hear about an event is that was too short. And I'm sorry to say that was the case here. But what I always say back is, how many events have you been to in Brussels about which you can say that it was too short? Most of them I have the opposite impression. So that's a compliment to all of the speakers. I'd have liked to have had more time, but this is only a beginning. The issues that we've opened up here today are not going to be solved today. They're going to be solved over time, every day, through the very important work that all of you do at home. Just on the issues involved, I wanted to say maybe a couple of words about disinformation. Very important theme here at the Lisbon Council is evidence-based policymaking, which the very first time I heard about it, I thought, well, that can't possibly be a thing, but it is. There's plenty of things that go on out there that aren't evidence-based at all. And I just want to say that at the end of the day, we can have facts, we can have opinions, we can have a big discussion about which is which. But at the end of the day, we need to have reverence, respect for the scientific process, for what's true, what isn't, what's rigorous, what's been tested. And we can, of course, all meet in certain spaces to discuss that. But at the end of the day, one of the reasons why the COVID response was so interesting is because there were facts in that particular debate. And I would argue that the same is true of climate. There are people out there who would say the opposite, but I think that's nonsense. I think the science is irrefutable. And the sooner we can get the science across, the sooner we can deal with this problem on a global basis. Now, that takes us very far from democracy. But let me just first of all thank everyone for your opinions, your views, your passion, and your work. It's a beginning and not an end. And I hope to see you all soon at the Lisbon Council, possibly on this topic, possibly another. And thanks for spending so much time with us on this, this busy afternoon, and to my team as well. Have a nice evening.